Hello, YouTube. It's the Grognard DM special birthday edition. I delayed my new video a couple of days because today is my birthday, and I decided that I'm going to break Star Trek down into a couple of pieces because there's so much to talk about with the first incarnation of it as a role-playing game. So it first came out in 1980 as the FASA game system, the same people that gave us the first battle mech, the big battle bot games, BattleTech. That's what BattleTech. And so they went into hyper detail. They tended to do that with FASA. I kind of liked it. They were characters that you kind of felt you already had a handle on. Basically, it's a percentile based game system. So all of your attributes and your stats are listed in percentages, and you need to roll under the score. Sometimes they got averaged. Like for instance, if you were seeing if and you were outwitting your opponent in Starship Combat, you might roll on that. And if it's got like a 90% on your Starship Combat Strategy Tactics, you want to roll that or less. Sometimes the game master might average that. So if you've got an intellect of 70, well, 160 divided by 2 gives you an 80%. So you need to roll an 80 or less. So could be math intensive depending on the DM. 7 attributes, one of whom was luck. And I don't know how many times my starship captain was very lucky. I don't know how many times he survived just because of a luck roll. But what happened with the character creation process is you had so many skills based on it. If I were to say bump any attribute as high as you could, it would be intelligence, because it gave you extra die rolls. It influenced a lot of your career elements. So you took your intelligence, 1/10 of it, and that was the number of skills you started off with before your academy development. Half in personal development, half in educational or academic stuff. And if it was an odd number, you chose where the extra roll went. And you could have up to 2 rolls to any one skill. And then you went to the academy, and you started off with the academy basic course, and then you had your branch school. Where you're going to be in the command division, where you're going to be a communications officer, an engineer, a science officer, a doctor, security, helm navigation. And then what would happen is these became overlays. For instance, when you go to the academy, you get a computer operations score of 40. If you already had something, because computer operation was one of the pre-academy skills. If you had put something into computer operations, you would add 40 to what you already rolled. So you get through your academy training, and then you had some extra rolls, again based on intelligence, for outside electives, stuff that you just studied as part of your academy time. And then you went to your branch school, which is where you really got some of your heavy boosts to your skills. For instance, a helm officer obviously is going to have 40 in Starship Helm operation. That's what he does. Navigator would get 40 to astrophysics, because that's how you plot courses. And this is all based on the original series. They did come out with, this is what actually caused them to lose their publication rights to the game. They came out with a Next Gen supplement when Next Gen hit the airwaves, and Paramount, I mentioned this in an earlier video, didn't realize that gamers are not hidebound and say, oh, well, Picard couldn't do that because it's not in his write-up. Writers will add things, and if you are playing the NPCs as player characters, as a player, you might want to have Picard develop a skill in something that's not in the original write-up. And it makes sense as an NPC that he might, over time, improve his skills. So, at any rate, once you got done with your branch schools, then you could improve a couple of your specializations in the branch by some die rolls, and then you got some more based on intelligence again. And depending on the eventual position on the ship that the character would hold, you would look at possible advanced training schools, which would be like command school if he's going to be possibly the starship commander or the executive officer. Good school to go to is command school. That's where you get the Kobayashi Maru. Because one of the big skills you get in command school is starship combat strategy tactics. So that's where that goes through. That's why some characters like Spock never took it. Because he never, as a cadet, never thought of it. He was a scientist. So he never thought of command for himself. There is department head school as well, which if you're going to be one of the senior department head officials, the chief medical officer, chief engineer, and so on, good advanced school to go through. And again, you get more skill bumps. The whole thing is when you come out of this, you have a character that is actually very skilled. And, as some gamers would say, playable. Any character is playable as far as I'm concerned, but, some are more of a challenge than others. And then you would figure out, okay, going to be the captain, so that's going to be so many tours of duty because nobody comes out of the academy with rank of captain. You built your way up. So what was your career like for that? If you have a high luck and a high intelligence, those will give you some reductions on the number of tours of duty. Each tour of duty is up to 5 years. They have an assignment chart for you also do cadet crews. I forgot about that. So depending on how you do your cadet crews, you don't necessarily come out of the academy as an ensign. If your cadet crew's results were high enough, you might come out as a lieutenant junior grade or even a full lieutenant. Plus those advanced schools give you 1 rank promotions as well. But they have this whole chart on the character sheet tracking your tours of duty and what your officer efficiency ratings were and so on. So if you had to start a character who's had 4 tours of duty before this ship, you kind of have a little guideline about what sort of history, what branch of Starfleet did he serve in? Was he constantly serving on the Constitution classes? Was he in Galaxy Exploration Command, which the Connies are a part of GalX? Were you in military ops? Were you in colonial ops? Were you in the Merchant Marines? Were you a Starbase desk jockey? Were you an instructor at the Academy? These are all possible options for a tour of duty. And so as you look at that, you kind of think, okay, what would that tour of duty be like? As a player, you're thinking, okay. And then you're just fleshing out. You've already got the skeleton of your character history. And you just flesh out what sort, especially the officer efficiency reports. If you wind up with a really bad one, it's like, okay, what did you do that really screwed up on this one? Versus if you have a really exceptional and outstanding rating, because it's possible with the officer efficiency reports to wind up with a negative score. And an outstanding thing is like a 10 or less. So if you wind up with a negative score, well, okay, what did I do? And you talk with the game master about this. What did I do to kind of get that kind of an outstanding? Did I get a promotion? Did I get a commendation or, Grand Kite Order of Tactics or something like that? And most DMs that I worked with would work with that and either say, oh yeah, that was your promotion, or, well, you're already pretty much at the rank you're going to be playing at, so we'll come up with commendations based on what kind of assignment it was. Now, obviously, you're probably not going to get the Grand Kite Order of Tactic if you were in Colonial Operations Command. But military operations, very possible. Maybe even a Starfleet Medal of Honor or something like that. Depends on the DM. The real drawback that the FASA game had is really in a genre where, yes, psionics are not intended to be a major thing. I mean, let's face it, in the original series, the only player character that was telepathic at all was Spock, if you ignore the pilot. But that was an abnormal, and they weren't really player characters, they were NPCs, because they were both part of the conflict coming up against Kirk. So, but they did run into species that were very powerfully psionic, the Metrones, the Melkots. In Plato's Stepchildren, they even gained temporarily some very powerful psionic abilities to combat the people they're running up against. So it's a shocking oversight, really. You kind of every DM had to pretty much wing it if it went beyond basic telepathy. How is this manifesting and making random psi rolls and everything? But, suppose there were some that psionically attacked the Enterprise crew. So how did that work? Apollo hit Scotty with the Thunderbolt. Do we treat that as a phaser attack? How do we handle that? So there was never really a fully fleshed out system for psionics. And as time goes on, we see, you got Troy, who's more of an empath, but her mother's full-on telepath and not touch telepath like Spock. Few other characters in the various franchises held certain levels of psionic ability. The other big area, and I have one friend that will disagree with me on that, but in the writing, they never described the process. They didn't really have a good system for improving the character between adventures. Yes, they do describe, okay, your attributes raised. Okay, by how much? By 1 point? Do you roll a die? This friend of mine that I'm thinking of that would disagree with me on saying that they didn't have a fully fleshed out advancement process, I would remind him that we homebrewed our own advancement system. We had to roll against our intelligence, and if it was a failure, we got a full D10, and if it was a success, we got a D5. Take the D10 and divide, because the theory we're operating under was you learn more from a failed attempt than you do from a successful one. So the fact that we homebrewed it indicates that it was lacking in some way, my friend. It was very sketchy and not at all detailed. It did not provide decent parameters. Now, that said, they had some amazing splat books they came out with to support it. The Andorian book is still one of the best, even with, I'll get into Way of the Clans in my next video with Last Unicorn, but the Andorian Way was a so much more in-depth, detailed book. The Orions was amazing. And then you also get, initially they're always considered to be Starfleet officers. Well, what about the enlisted people? I'm not talking about lower decks people. Lower decks, they're talking about lower ranked officers. Sorry, we already did that. Sulu was a lieutenant in the original series, and Chekhov was an ensign. I'm talking about people who are not commissioned officers. The enlisted grunts. Starfleet did have them. O'Brien was one, for instance. But they came out with a book called Trader Captains and Merchant Princes, in which they addressed that thing. You could be a non-Starfleet character. You're just making your way in the galaxy as a merchant or a trader. But they also had procedures in there for, well, what if I'm going to create a Starfleet character that's not an officer? Including, am I just simply a spaceman? Or am I a chief petty officer or some other NCO rank? So you could with that book create a non-commissioned Starfleet character. The Orions are one of my favorite supplements in that, as they describe the Orion culture, they're very imitative and they're fascinated with 20th century Earth films. So you could have as much a chance of running into an Orion pirate that's talking like something out of The Godfather, or an Orion pirate that's talking like something out of a John Wayne movie, made for fun interactions. And also, FASA eventually developed rules for people that didn't want to play Federation. There are always those in the crowd. So then they created rule sets for both the Klingons and the Romulans. The Romulans were one of the last sets they came out with, so it's not as detailed. Plus, the Klingon set also had, as part of its basis, the detail in a novel that Gene Roddenberry said, this is, as far as I'm concerned, absolutely canon. This is how I view Klingon culture being. And so they had a lot drew a lot out of that book, and just simply adapted the Starfleet rules for Klingons. Intelligence manuals for somebody playing an intelligence operative in Starfleet or some other, translated very nicely into Klingons or Romulans. So it was over the 8 years or so, 7 or 8 years they were publishing it, they came out with a wealth of detail in the way of splat books. Plus, they also updated up through the third movie, so you had source books for the various ships as they evolve. You see the main Enterprise crew get better in their skills too. See, even NPCs improve. But they came out with a ship construction manual so you could design your own starships, and it didn't matter that they had rules for designing Federation ships, Klingon, Romulan, Gorn, Tholian even. And I know a lot of friends play Starfleet Battles from Armadillo Designs that then took what they saw there and said, oh, I can come up with Interstellar Concordium and the Lyrans, the Kzinti, and the Hydrans, races that aren't represented in canon. And I'm not going to really get into Starfleet Battles that much because it's not really a role-playing game. It's more along the lines of the miniatures war games, where people are commanding starships, and it's all about the damage to the ship. They did come up with a specific system for doing ship versus ship combat, but because the FASA game is a role-playing game first and foremost, those were designed to end combats very quickly. For instance, a Federation, the USS Enterprise A's refit photon torpedo would knock down, just one torpedo would knock down any Klingon shield. It did 20 points of damage, and the Klingon's best shielding is 16. So you're automatically, if you hit with a photon torpedo, you're doing internal damage and possibly destroying the ship. Not with one torpedo, but if you fire a second one. So it was designed to get the wargaming aspect out of the way so we could get back to the role-playing aspect. Now, one reason why I wanted to also do FASA by itself is because I actually have a personal experience. When they first came out with it, they took it to various conventions for playtests using the celebrity guests playing various characters. And at this convention that I was at, it was Starship Cincinnati, 1980-81. And Jimmy Doohan and Walter Koenig were both there as celebrity guests. And they'd come up with a Trouble with Tribbles adventure module for them to basically play through the events of the Trouble with Tribbles. Well, Jimmy and Walter, having the sense of humor they have, switched characters. Walter played Scotty, and Jimmy played Chekhov. And, well, Jimmy's ribbing Walter, saying, you see, I'm going to be playing him smart, Walter. I'm not picking on the biggest Klingon in the room. And Scotty wound up getting knocked out with a chair broken over his head. Cyrano Jones did not turn out quite so well. Chekhov knocked a Klingon into him as he's going through the bar, so he got taken out by a Klingon. And Chekhov did significantly better because he did not pick on the largest Klingon in the room. But it was a fun thing to sit in on and watch people play. And yeah, I like it so much that, I mentioned Hackmaster in previous videos. I actually adapted the FASA game system to the Hackmaster game engine, the second-by-second combat. It just seemed to me that that would be a really good marriage. I mean, your science fiction, high-paced, well, not really high-paced action sometimes with Star Trek can be very cerebral, but that high-paced, where every second may count, especially with the number of countdowns they wind up having to add tension and various things. The second-by-second count-up for combat just seemed like a really good way to do that. So long as whoever's playing Spock, for instance, is paying attention to the count-up. As soon as I announce every second, he could say, "Mr. Scott, you have 23 seconds." Then the next one, "You have 22 seconds. Like Scotty said, I don't need a bloomin' cuckoo clock. But, and I play tested it a couple of times, and people seem to enjoy it. I need to run it a little bit more. I need to run Hackmaster a little bit more so people are more accustomed to the game engine. But, so at any rate, that's the FASA version of Star Trek, which kind of started the ball rolling. FASA also did a Doctor Who role-playing game that was very close to how they did Star Trek. I don't know why they didn't do it the exact same way and expand it a little bit, take care of things that are Time Lordy, like dimensional physics and things like that. But it never really caught on. The additional elements that they added with having like 6 possible categories that each skill rating fell under. I don't think people cared for that much. I think they were expecting to see, especially when they took one look at the character sheet, a Doctor Who version of the Star Trek game. And it was a disappointment that way. But because there is so much detail, the other games are much simpler, both in terms of character design and in terms of play, than the FASA game. So I'll just kind of do them in the next video. And once again, unless I see something in the comments or hear something on Facebook or somewhere else asking me to do specifically this topic, I'll cover the other Star Trek games. One of them I'm not at all familiar with. I don't believe I've ever played it, unless one of my friends slipped it in on me. Because if they did, it's very similar to The Last Unicorn. So that's all I got to say on FASA. And so until the next time we meet, may all your hits be crits.